So today we're going to do a new type of episode where I'm going to show you some of my favorite books that have completely changed my business that you've probably never heard of. And I'm going to go through a couple of the key points and hopefully inspire you to pick up some of these books and pursue your own further education. I'll say I do a ton of reading. I'm always trying to find stuff that falls somewhat outside of the fitness industry and, a different perspective, because I think that's where the best ideas are always going to come from, is when you can kind of abstract different ideas and concepts and stories and see how they fit in. Now, if you want to run a truly innovative and creative business, you've got to go outside of the norm of what most people are kind of reading and researching. And that's what I hope that this episode kind of does for you. So I have 9 of my favorite books that apply to business and life that you've probably never heard of. And I'm going to touch on some of my key topics from each one. So the first book is called Actionable Gamification. It's by Yu-Kai Chow. I don't even know if I pronounced that right, but this is more of a reference than anything. But if you read it straight through, you're going to get some unbelievable insights. So this guy is an expert in understanding gamification, which is one of my favorite elements of running my business, is understanding what motivates people, what drives people to take action, how to build incentives and reward structures. So he's referenced not only from video games, but how business has applied all of these types of things. And the subheadline here is Beyond Points, Badges, and Leaderboards, because it truly is. It truly digs into the deeper psychology about gamification in business. So the first point that I want to touch on in here, he has over 100 different game types or game techniques that he references. But the first one is using elements like progress bars in your business. So, you've probably seen them in different landing pages, but finding new ways to show progress bars. And this could show up anywhere from getting opt-ins on your website, filling out forms, but people are very much inclined to finish what they started versus complete more steps. So the more you can emphasize, hey, you're 75% of the way there, just take this next action, you're going to get more people to sign up versus, fill out this form. So find ways to use progress bars. And this could even apply to, levels of membership. If people have been here for a year, you could have certain levels of progress bar for, different types of tenure and milestones. But progress bars are a really cool way to create some gamification in your business. Next is another one of my favorites, and it's called the conformity anchor. And it's basically anchoring conformity or showing what the social norms are within your business. And what I mean by that is making the implicit behaviors more explicit. So they reference a company that worked in the power industry, and they were trying to get people to understand their own energy usage. And what they did was, instead of just sending a report of their energy usage, they sent a report of energy usage compared to their neighbors and compared to what's considered the ideal. And they created basically emojis for if your energy usage was higher than your neighbors, you would get a sad face. If it was lower than your neighbors, you would get a smiley face. And it created this sense of gamification where you were trying to kind of compete with who could preserve the most energy in the neighborhood. So a really cool way to do that. You see that in hotels a lot of times when they say things like, 80% of our guests reuse their towels. It's just something that explicitly implies this is how we do things here. So in your business, you might use things like this for, 80% of our members choose the 2 times a week small group membership, or, 80% of clients that see the best results buy our supplements or follow our nutrition plans. So find a way to make an anchor that conformity that you want people to follow. And the last one here is what's called magnetic caps. So it's a game technique. It's basically understanding the model of scarcity. One of the really good examples of this is people are drawn towards things that are harder to obtain, or there's a level of scarcity around. And they reference the company Dropbox. And the company Dropbox is kind of like a Google Drive, like data storage system. And Dropbox had an incentive program where they said you can buy more storage for $20, or you can refer 3 friends to Dropbox and get X amount of storage. And they found that that magnetic cap provided a level of friction towards this newer, higher level of status. And that was one way that they did it. It's like, you have limited storage. If you refer 3 friends, you can unlock bigger capacity. So there's a lot of ways you can do this in your business, but this book outlines over 100 different game techniques that we've used in my company to lead my staff, motivate my gym members to achieve better results, and to utilize the best services that we offer. Up next, this is one of my favorite business books. It is Leadership is Language by David Marquette. He's a naval officer. He also wrote a book called Turn the Ship Around, but it basically talks about the best leaders lead with their language and an understanding of different power hierarchies in leadership positions. So one of the key points that I'll touch on is this idea of share of voice. So one of my favorite leadership concepts is being a great leader is not about having all the answers. It's not about leading and filling the room with your ideas and voice. It's actually about creating a share of voice that is equal. So if you put a recording device in your meetings, the percentage of talk time should be shared across everybody in the company, right? If it's just your voice, you're actually creating a really big power hierarchy that is the opposite of leadership, because it pushes people and makes them feel less confident and competent and don't talk quite as much. The more you talk, the less they talk. And the more you talk, the less you are listening. So you would want to strive towards a more equal share of voice by doing things like trying to be the last person to speak on different topics, probing people with questions, or asking people for advice that typically don't offer it. Those are ways that you can get an equal share of voice as a leader. Another thing in here is one of my favorite ways to elicit better conversations in meetings is a technique they call vote, then discuss. Now, listen, when you think of the way most people make decisions in business or in meetings, they'll usually discuss the issue at length, the pros and cons, the benefits, the work involved, and then they'll all vote on it. But the problem is, most people are just going to vote based on what they think the leader wants to do. Now, I know in my company, I have a pretty dominant voice in our meetings. And, when I make it known what I want, it's going to elicit people to just want to go along with that for the most part. So this flips that whole process on its head, where you say, hey, we want to add a new class time on a scale of 1 to 10. How motivated are you to want to do that, right? You get them to vote first, and then you take what are called the detractors, the people that have the outlying vote, and ask them to speak on it first, right? It's a really, really powerful tactic to getting more people to speak up and get an equal share of voice in those meetings. Now, the last topic in here that I loved and really changed my leadership ability is the understanding of what actually causes behavior change. So he talks about behavior change falls into 3 elements, and he calls ABC of behavior change. And it's the 3 stages of a behavior. So there's what's called the antecedent. So what happens before the behavior, there's the behavior itself, and then there's the consequence. Now, what most people get wrong is they think that behaviors change because of the antecedent, what happens before the behavior. So let me give you an example of how you can apply this ABC model for getting behavior change. So I'll give you, we changed our opening and closing procedure at the gym, and it requires just a little bit of a different approach to make sure that we check all the boxes to making sure the gym gets opened and it's a uniform experience across the whole company. So what most people do is they believe that change happens in what happens before. So you host a meeting and you say, hey guys, we've got this new procedure and we're really excited. Here's what you're going to do. And maybe you post a reminder every single day and you say, hey, remember to follow the checklist for opening and closing the gym. They perform the behavior, and then there's the consequence. So consequence can be either good or bad. And that never drives behavior. What they find is that behaviors are changed, at least in the long run, based on the consequence after the behavior. Even more importantly, they found that the consequence being positive drove more behavior change than the consequence of being negative. So meaning an employee comes in and they don't go through that procedure and they get yelled at or talked to or reprimanded is a negative consequence, is not going to drive the behavior as much as them doing the behavior and doing it right and being positively rewarded right away. So I've always said, like, leadership is a lot like training your dog. If you come home and your dog's shit in the house and you kick him, he's never going to stop shitting in the house. In fact, he's probably going to develop anxiety and issues and shit and piss in the house more often. But when you reward him for shitting and pissing outside, he is going to be more likely to shit and piss outside. Same thing with this ABC model of change. The change won't happen based on the speech that you give or the level of teaching that you do. It's going to happen when you positively reward the behavior immediately after it happens, so that you give them a dopamine hit after doing it. So just a couple of the key points from this book. It was a really, really good one that I've reread multiple times and shared with a lot of my team members and friends in the industry. So The Culting of Brands by Douglas Atkin was actually one of the first books that I read about business. And Douglas Atkin was an expert studying cults and religious movements and seeing how different businesses have applied the same principles from people like the Hare Krishnas, the Mormon community, and different cults throughout the years, and how they got people to give away all of their life savings, and how different businesses, specifically Harley Davidson, JetBlue, Virgin Mobile, and Apple, have used the exact same tactics in their business. And we've applied a lot of the tactics in here at my different businesses. So one of the topics they talk about here is what they call the doctrine of difference. And it's the idea that when you imply what you are, you're also saying what you are not. Now, Seth Godin has a famous quote, and he says, if you want to create insiders, you also have to create outsiders. So creating a culture of kind of exclusivity and people that don't belong in your business is really powerful. So if you draw a line in the sand, think like a Mike Boyle or CrossFit, people that have developed these really strong cult followings, understand that they have very strong beliefs about who we are and who we are not. So finding ways to do that in your business can really help you stand out and create much more of a cult following inside. In addition to some of those belief system outlines, they just talk about how to onboard new clients and ways that you can get a deeper level of commitment from the people that shop with you. So this is a really great reference. And Douglas Atkin wrote a few other books that are also really helpful as well. This one's really quick, guys. Let's Get Results, Not Excuses by James Bleach. So really old book. I'm pretty sure it's out of print, but essentially it is anything that even smells like an excuse or a justification for lack of results should be eliminated like a toxic presence in your business. In your business, it's the idea that you want to foster a culture of extreme ownership. Now, that's also a great book by Jocko. I think it was his first book. And this episode is about books that you've never heard of. So this is, the original theory of, anything that is a justification or excuse for lack of results. While there may be some truth to it, or there may be some legitimate reasons why you're not there, it's not helpful. So Let's Get Results, Not Excuses is all about focusing on what you can control and building a culture of getting results despite of all the excuses. So really good one to check out. Up next, we have Build by Tony Fadell. So this is the guy that invented the iPod. So he worked for the company before Apple, developed a lot of different products. He was a software engineer and wrote a really cool book. The subheadline is An Unorthodox Guide to Making Things Worth Making. So I mentioned that I like things that fall outside the fitness industry. So this obviously is in the software engineering world and creation of physical products. But a couple of the key points here, he talks about building teams and really building organizations and leading people effectively. The biggest takeaway that I had from here is a chapter on management, and essentially how management really is not a natural progression for every role. In fact, management is a completely different skill set than being an individual contributor. And in fact, the best individual contributors have qualities that make them typically a really bad manager. So when people, want to seek promotion and growth in the organization, if they're the best individual contributor, not only does it not naturally elicit great management skill, it actually is probably going to make them a bad manager. Because what makes you a great individual contributor is wanting to be the star of the show, having a strong knowledge of product knowledge, and being like the guy that can solve problems. And being a great manager is more about being a problem giver and not a problem solver. So management being a great skill means that the best individual contributor will not make the best manager. So especially, we've seen this with people that are great coaches do not make great managers all the time. It's a very different skill set. So understand that and lead your team knowing that you don't have to become a manager. You can grow in your career and you can grow to the next phase of your career without managing if you don't want to be a manager. Another key point in here was they go in depth about data versus emotion. One of my favorite takeaways from this book is he does a deep dive into data versus emotion when it comes to making products for the marketplace. And if you just ask people what they want, typically they're not going to tell you what they really want. So you have to understand data versus emotion. There's a really famous quote from Henry Ford, and he said, if you asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. But he created a vehicle instead and changed the industry. So it's understanding that you've got to be able to read between the lines of data and speak the language of data versus just asking your clients what they want. Because if you just ask the clients what they want, they're probably going to just say what they know. So that's a really important skill set to develop, is to use data to drive decisions and be able to read between the lines of data to see what's really being said. So really good book if you're interested in some of the more higher level leadership and development tactics of business. Up next, we have The Effortless Experience. I read this book years ago, and it's one that I've kind of come back to several times. Matthew Dixon is the author. He's written several really, really good books on sales and leadership. So he's actually a researcher. So he spends time researching the business. So it's honestly a little bit of a difficult read because it's very data heavy. But the key points of this book is that what drives customer loyalty and retention. And it's actually not what we think. And his books have come under a lot of scrutiny because it goes against a lot of general kind of thinking, is that customer loyalty is driven by customer satisfaction. And through his research and tens of millions of data points, he has found that customer loyalty actually has nothing to do with customer satisfaction. The wow factor that we want to deliver actually doesn't drive loyalty. And what drives loyalty is the effortless experience. So he developed what's called the customer effort score. Now, a lot of people are familiar with the Net Promoter Score, the NPS, which is how satisfied your team members are. But the customer effort score has shown to be a much, much stronger signifier of retention and repeat business and customer loyalty. Now, another really big discovery that he made was that customer service touch points are a strong indicator of lack of loyalty. The more often a client has to come to you with a customer service issue or deal with customer service at all, the more likely they are to be unhappy and leave, right? We all like to think as managers and leaders that customer service is the greatest thing that we can do and the experience that we create is this great thing. But there's also a reason why the line for the airport kiosk is longer than the in-person check-in. This day and age, people don't want to deal with people. They just want to do things as easy and effortless as possible. So keeping that in mind, finding a balance of self-service technology, allowing people to utilize self-service versus dealing with humans, eliminating some of the friction points in customer service, and understanding that it's not so much about the wow factor as it is how easy you are to work with. And reading this actually moved me away from doing things like elaborate client gifts and some of these like really big things that we were doing for clients in the past, because we found that the data showed it wasn't really working to retain clients. So a lot of really important points if you can get through the data to dig them out. The Whole Brain Child. So some of the books that I'll read are actually a lot of parenting and human psychology, which I found that learning about how to be a better parent also makes you be a better manager and leader. So the key points of this book is understanding the integration of the whole brain, understanding the logical and kind of executive function with the kind of instinctual and system 2 type thinking brain. So one of my favorite topics from this to understand is what they call the handy model of the brain, where they call it the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain. The upstairs brain handles all of our decision-making and executive function. It helps us delay gratification. And the downstairs brain is our primitive brain. It's what, drives on instinct and gut reaction. And it's only when you can integrate the two parts of the brain that you can operate at your fullest potential. So the understanding is that the executive function requires a slower thought processing and the lower area of the brain. So if you took your hand and put your thumb in here and closed it off, this is the example of the brain that they give. The top being the executive function, the bottom being the limbic system and the more primitive brain. Is that when you lose control, they call it blowing your lid. And it means that you've lost some of your executive functioning and you're operating based on that downstairs brain. So in parenting, you want to find ways to communicate with your kids and to incentivize your kids and to parent in a way that integrates the upstairs and the downstairs brain. They give you lots of different tactics and tips. One of them being understanding the difference between feel and am. So just because you feel something does not mean that you are something. Another one is, and we've used this a lot over the years, is learning how to name your feelings and experiences. The more granular you can become in bringing a name or a title to a way that you're feeling or a way that a customer is feeling, the more you can bring logical thinking to it versus emotion. So a lot of takeaways. So again, it's one of those that you kind of have to abstract some of these ideas and think how it applies in a leadership or a customer service standpoint, but really effective. I think a lot of these parenting books are really applicable to being a great leader. Profit Works. So this is a great book on outlining bonus and incentive structures for your team. They outline some of the keys for developing an incentive plan, and then they really give you 3 models that you can follow. So the first point that they kind of make is that all of your incentive plans must be self-funded. So what that means is they really push for a profit-based incentive plan so that you don't give bonuses unless there's profit. And there's a difference between revenue and profit. If you're this far into the podcast, I hope that you at least have a knowledge of that. But if you're bonusing based on revenue, but for whatever reason you're not profitable, you're just going to be less profitable and not have any money. So developing a system based on profit is really critical. Number 2 is that you need to build an incentive plan that doesn't develop silos. Now, I've made this mistake in my business where if we have incentivized heavily on sales, our trainers can develop a sense of resentment because they feel like they're just dumping wrong fit people into the business or rushing through the customer service experience just to get sales made. So you want to find a way to rally all the departments in your company, the trainers, the marketers, the salespeople. If you're only incentivizing in a way that supports one area of the business, you're going to create silos, which means they're not going to communicate with each other and not going to produce a congruent experience. And then finally, they outline 3 different types of bonus structures, which we've used a little bit of all of them. One of them is just a pure profit trigger, where if you profit X amount, you would choose a percentage of that profit to be given as a bonus. Another one is what's called a profit pail trigger, and pail meaning a bucket. And so you would say, if we profit this much, X amount goes in this bucket, X amount goes in this bucket. And there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of spin that. And the last one is just a top line trigger. So because my business, we've, reinvested so much in future locations, we've done a lot more with top line triggers just because profitability gets a little gray area when we're reinvesting so much and kind of launching new businesses. So this book will really help you outline, what bonus structure is best for your business, how you can incentivize without establishing silos, and lots of other great tips from this book. Finally, the last book that I want to touch on today is called Leading Change. So I'll be honest, this one took me a few years to really get through. While it's not very long, it is very boring. It was written a long time ago. I think it was written in the, maybe in the 90s, but it's considered one of the best books for leading organizational change. Now, why did it take me so long to get through this? Number 1, I didn't need it. I didn't need the book at the time. I picked this up several years ago because it was recommended, and it's about leading organizational change. Now, if you are just running a run-of-the-mill business, there's not a huge change in the way you operate. You're not changing your business model. You're not scaling to multiple locations. Probably not all that impactful or kind of needed in your business. You're just managing your regular business. You're not leading change. But what I found was when I started scaling new locations, when I had some turnover of key team members, this is where it really applied. So it walks through the 8 steps of leading organization change, helping people be motivated to change and getting the best results from that change. So really good book, really centered around one concept, which is getting the most effective and fastest change possible from the organization. So that's it, guys. 9 books that you've probably either never heard of or never thought to read that could have a really serious impact on your business. So if you are inclined at all, I would recommend you check those out.